For this opponent discussion today, we are going to focus on should government control affordable housing? This presentation is brought to you by Travis Eliason, Shane Oliverson, and Curtis Poole. If government controls housing, they can do it in a number of ways. Today we'll focus on three. Number one, rent control. Number two, incentivize building of affordable housing. And number three, subsidize lower income individuals. So to start, we'll answer the question, what is rent control? Rent control are laws adopted by state and local governments designed to protect tenants. They also set a price ceiling of monthly rents, and it also determines a percentage at which rent prices may increase. Now let's focus on some of the negative impacts of rent control. First and foremost, rent control discriminates against people who need housing. With rent control enforced, many people who need apartments are discriminated against, as they're limited with respect to their choices of housing. As rent control shows favor to those occupying these types of apartments over those who are in need of a place to live, people looking for an apartment are limited in their selection and what they can afford. In a free market, if rents are higher, people can share the space, and therefore landlords profit as well as renters who can still live in a nice place that's affordable too. As a result, apartment space is better utilized and overall upkeep is maintained. Number two, necessary repairs, remodels, and general maintenance cannot happen. In many instances, the necessary repairs or refurbishments that need to be made in rent-controlled buildings can't be facilitated because the landlords do not have the funds to do so because of inflation. Therefore, many residents can feel angry toward their landlord because of his refusal to update or fix the property, and the landlord is unhappy because he's forced into taking losses or minimal returns on his investment. Even if he wants to make repairs or updates, his cash flow situation is too weak to justify the expense. Number three, rent control can destroy the incentive to build new properties. Many potential landlords will not invest in properties or build new properties as the restrictions imposed by rent control make it impossible to keep up with any rise in inflation and find the needed capital to construct new apartment homes. Where owners of luxury properties are incentivized to operate at a profit, people building low rent or rent controlled properties do not have the same economic incentives in which to see consistent profits or a rise in the amount of money they produce from owning such properties. It really just amounts to simple economics. Number four, deteriorating and abandoned buildings. Because of deterioration and the lack of surrounding housing, landlords can be forced into abandoning their properties because they can't sell them or pay the required real estate taxes. Tenants, too, leave because a building can't be repaired or updated. Also, as stated, housing is not built in the surrounding areas either because apartments have much higher rents than they normally would in a free market without the constraints of rent control, or builders will not manufacture new apartment homes because they feel they can't make a profit. Although the idea behind rent control is a noble one, it's not a positive economic move if you want to keep up with inflation, adequately utilize space optimally, or maintain apartments to the satisfaction of others. Rent control versus capitalism. Rent control causes an issue in our competition-based housing market. Capitalism is all about competition. When the government steps in, the maximum rent control price will be significantly lower than the free market price. This creates a fractured market and affects the supply and demand of apartments and adequate housing. Supply and demand. Rent control will reduce the quantity of units offered in the short run. Construction of new apartments will be restricted because of artificially capped returns in the long run. In unhampered markets, equilibrium occurs where supply meets demand. When the government disrupts this equilibrium by creating price ceilings below the market price, shortage is created. Emergence of the slumlord. With a line of potential tenants eager to move in at the official ceiling price, landlords do not have incentive to maintain the building. They don't need to put on new coats of paint, change the light bulbs in the hallways, keep the elevator in working order, or get out of bed at 5 a.m. when a tenant complains that the water heater is busted. If there's a rash of robberies in and around the building, the owner won't feel a financial motivation to install lights, cameras, buzzer gates, a guard, or other costly measures to protect their customers. Furthermore, if a tenant falls behind on their rent, there is less incentive for the landlord to cut them some slack, because the landlord knows they can replace them right away after eviction. In other words, all of the behavior we associate with the term slumlord is due to the government's policy of rent control. It is not the free market in action. Economists are virtually unanimous in their condemnation of rent control. In a survey of economists of the American Economic Association, fully 93% agreed that a ceiling on rents reduces the quality and quantity of housing available. Economists point to 6 principal objections to rent control. Number 1, inhibition of new construction. Number 2, deterioration of existing housing. Number 3, reduced property tax revenue. Number 4, substantial administrative cost. Number 5, reduced consumer mobility. And 6, consumer entry costs. The same argument that is made about government creating jobs can be said about government creating housing. Government can create conditions for jobs, or in this case housing can develop, but should never be involved or too heavy-handed. Government doesn't create or build housing, developers do. The more control government tries to inject, the more it will affect housing in the negative. Why is housing so expensive? It can be explained as a vicious cycle. 1. Because of high prices, the need for affordable housing increases. 2. The government tries to help those needy individuals and provides them subsidies through vouchers, rent control, or other means. To help builders and landlords, the government provides incentives to them to rent at lower prices or build lower income housing. 3. To pay for these subsidies and incentives, the government is forced to raise taxes and raise fees on the cost of new buildings and charge fines to those builders and landlords that don't build or rent as they want. 4. This creates a higher cost to builders to build. Developers do not absorb these costs, they are passed on to buyers. 5. Home prices increase because of these costs, and then we're right back to where we started, only with higher prices than when we started. So who can we blame for these higher costs? 1. The developers, or fat cats, are an easy target. They are greedy, right? They are just wanting to get rich. Developers build what is allowed by the government and markets. They want to make a good return on their investments, just like any of us. 2. The government, or heavy hand, as well-intentioned policies are created to help the poor or incentivize the developers. And the more meddling the government does, the worse the situation becomes. A National Home Builder study found that almost 30% of a home's cost is due to government fees and regulations. 3. What about us? We want quality in our homes, we want the luxury, we also don't want a development built next to us which may affect our quality of life. We will say it's because of traffic, overcrowded schools, crime, etc. We all are guilty of it, and will be guilty of it in the future. A survey of New York developers showed that over 70% of new projects or developments were stopped or slowed down because of the above complaint. In addition to the Corolla, Toyota makes a mid-priced car, the Camry. It has a few more bells and whistles and costs a little more. Then Toyota can sell its high-end car, the Avalon. It has all the comforts at a price. It's Toyota's luxury model. The government doesn't tell Toyota how many of each car to make. Yes, Toyota makes more money per car on the Avalon, but the market price doesn't allow them to sell many. Toyota makes more money on the Camry because it makes up for it in volume, and have the Corolla to sell for those who can't afford the higher priced Camry. The great thing about cars is people drive what they can afford or want to afford. If I'm driving a Corolla now and I can afford a Camry, I can trade in my Corolla and buy the Camry. This is just like housing. If prices are right and the market is truly dictating prices, the people who are in the lower income housing can move up to the next level, thus opening up more space in the lower income housing levels. I like the saying, this year's luxury becomes next year's affordability. So the question is, what should be done? First, government needs to get out of the way. Stop giving subsidies, stop giving incentives, and stop dictating what should be built. Second, Developers should be allowed to build what the market prices dictate. Third, landlords should be allowed to charge fair market prices for their units. When this happens, the volume of housing will increase. When that happens, builders and landlords will have to compete for buyers and renters. With that competition, prices will drop.